I really hope that my tone does not come across as condescending.
Jordan annexed the West Bank. 1950. They literally annexed it. They gave citizenship to, yes, literally. They literally did. It was, yes.
You want to debate semantics about all of this and refusing, again, insisting on getting into a level of weeds here.
It's very annoying that people accuse me of not knowing anything about this topic, but then I understand when you're debating things like this, you don't know anything about the topic. And that's why you get upset when you talk about like getting in the weeds.
And then supporting what I view as a policy that is completely inexcusable in terms of what Israel has been doing to Palestinians for decades now. And the US insisting on unlimited military, diplomatic, and financial support of it.
All right, well, where do you want to start?
Israel has been practicing apartheid against Palestinians for a very, very long time. Their occupation of the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem is illegal under international law. The United Nations has called on Israel to withdraw from these territories repeatedly. Eventually, Palestinians came along to acknowledge the fact that they are the weaker party and cannot reclaim their entire historic homeland, settled for a land division in which Israel gets to keep 80% of the territory, which is Israel as recognized by the UN. And Israel is obligated to withdraw from those occupied territories, the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem. And that was the idea behind the so-called peace process. And what Israel did throughout that entire peace process is build more and more settlements throughout the occupied territories. They entrenched that occupation. They made it impossible for Palestinians to have any path towards genuine independence. And every human rights organization in the world at this point, all the big ones, Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, and even Israel's largest human rights organization, B'Tselem, all acknowledge that Israel is practicing apartheid in the occupied Palestinian territories, at least, and some of them go to say apartheid in all of Israel, frankly, in which one set of people gets rights on account of being Jewish Israelis, and then different categories of Palestinians getting fewer and fewer rights, and an act of ethnic cleansing in slow motion that we've been watching for decades. And Palestinians have pursued every method possible to achieve freedom, and all of them have led to a dead end because Israel has no interest in allowing Palestinians to live as a free people.
When you said it made it impossible for Palestinians to pursue peace, I think Palestinians have made it impossible for Palestinians to pursue peace, but we could talk about that. Ethnic cleansing or genocide is probably one of the least effective ethnic cleansings or genocides I've ever seen in my entire life. I think that's kind of a silly claim. When we say Palestinians have pursued peace as much as they can, I completely and utterly disagree. I think that Israel has made a few really good faith efforts towards trying to pursue peace, but I think that Palestinians have always thought that fighting is more in their interest than not. And I think that's why Arafat walked away from things like the Camp David summit in 2000, or why things like the Clinton parameters and everything were shot down. I don't know if the Palestinians have ever seriously considered a peace process that involves a two-state solution. I feel like their only goal is a one-state solution, and I think most of the population polling data seems to support that a one-state solution through violence with unequal rights for citizens is the preference. And then I would wholly reject any comparisons to the ANC. The ANC didn't target civilians. The ANC didn't believe in martyrdom or shaheed. The ANC, didn't have suicide bombers running into buses. The ANC wasn't committing intifadas, especially the second intifada from 2000 to 2004. I just don't think that the ANC has any resemblance whatsoever to the Palestinian people or the current Palestinian struggle. I know people like to draw comparisons to South Africa because they want to lean into that apartheid comparison, but I think it's pretty wacky when you look at the stated goals and how both sides conduct themselves to compare the two. I agree that there's expansion, but one of the big things was after the Oslo Accords was hopefully no new settlements. Now, that wasn't even technically a formal agreement, and there was no formal agreement in place from 93 onwards yet to completely withdraw from the West Bank because they hadn't set that deal out, right? The Oslo Accords is really only establishing the Palestinian Authority government and starting to hand over basically security arrangements to the Palestinians in the West Bank and hopefully the Gaza Strip. And then hopefully that would lead to, I think the goal was originally 5 years. It got pushed to 7, and then that fell apart and then the second intifada happened. But the goal was that hopefully after 5 years of this transitional government, there would be a new enduring peace process that would be negotiated. But for the Oslo Accords, very specifically, there were no actual agreements made about what it would look like in 5 years because they just weren't ready to negotiate that.
Yeah, I think we're missing the forest for the trees here. Israel's presence in the West Bank is illegal. They have to leave.
Whether something is legal or illegal is not really at issue here. First of all, when we're citing human rights organizations or UN General Assembly, all the UN General Assembly resolutions are non-binding. When you look at a resolution like 242, it doesn't even really make sense. And I like the advisory opinions or opinions given by UN General Assembly bodies just doesn't really mean much. And again, the legality, the opinions of the ICJ that's being asked to give an opinion on something where neither territory is actually submitting themselves to the jurisdiction or rulings of the ICJ. Turns out, insofar as international law goes, it's kind of pointless. I mean, they're nice arguments and we can use them, I guess, if we feel like they're bolstering something, but they don't really address any of the issues on the ground, and they don't really get us any closer to an actual peace process. I think even you would agree that screaming at Israel over and over again, hey, there are some people that think that what you're doing is illegal, doesn't really get us anywhere. It's not.
No. I think when one country steals land from another people against international law and is ethnically cleansing them in slow motion, pushing them out of their homes, driving them out of their homes to the condemnation of every human rights organization in the world, I think screaming at them about that is the right thing to do.
When we say Israel steals land from other people, what does that mean?
When Israel was founded in 1948, they took over 78% of historic Palestine. The parts they did not take over were the West Bank and Gaza, and that's when those areas fell under Jordanian control and Egyptian control.
Correct. Jordan annexed the West Bank. 1950. They literally annexed it. They gave citizenship. Yes, literally. They literally did. It was, yes. That's why it was called. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No. The impression that I'm under right now is that you want to debate semantics about all of this and refusing, again, insisting on getting into a level of weeds here that is designed specifically to miss the overarching picture.
Okay.
The overarching picture, again, for simplicity's sake, the entire world agrees that the West Bank is not part of Israel and Israel is obligated to withdraw from it. Israel entered a peace process in 1993 that is premised on withdrawing from the occupied territories.
No, they're not.
They did the opposite.
The Oslo Accords were not premised on that. The Oslo Accords did not make any actual commitments. Also, it's very annoying that people accuse me of not knowing anything about this topic, but then I understand when you're debating things like this, you don't know anything about the topic, and that's why you get upset when you talk about like getting in the weeds. Even that quote that you gave earlier from the Israeli foreign minister about how like I wouldn't have accepted the deal if I was a Palestinian at the time. That's not what he said. That's not what that quote says. And if you actually go to the book and you actually read the passage where he talks about it, what he said was that conditions were not right at the time for Palestinians to feel like they could accept that deal. But he was talking about the conditions that existed throughout the country, not that it was a bad deal. Universally, every other person in the Arab world, the Egyptian leadership, Saudi foreign ambassador said that these deals were amazing, that what was coming after Camp David, what was being negotiated at the Tabla Summit, these were unbelievable deals, that Arafat went into these things expecting 91% of the land, and by the end, with land swaps, he was getting 95 to 97% of the original land that the Palestinians had. The idea that these were horrible deals that were being put before them is not true. And the idea that the Oslo Accords were some permanently negotiated peace status is also not true. That's why there was going to be another meeting in 5 years, ideally, to figure out what the permanent arrangements would be. I don't agree that any of this is getting lost in the weeds. I think it's really important to know the specifics.
No, I'm catching on to your style about this. I think you're less interested in the actual topic and more interested in winning an arguments based on kind of like silly and manufactured points. It's quite transparently what is happening here.
Wait, what is, don't you think it's important to understand like what Jordan's goal was when they invaded the West Bank, or what Egypt was doing when they invaded the Gaza Strip, rather than just screaming apartheid over and over again? The problem is in the current situation, people make so many bad allusions to history that is not true, that it makes it hard to understand like where
history is rather straightforward. Palestinians are being denied freedom because Palestinians is not allowing them to be free. That is all there is to say about it. It literally is documented bit by bit. Palestinians are living under Israeli control.
Wait, you can't get into Gaza without going through an Israeli border?
Without Israeli permission, or on the Egyptian side,
there you go.
Effectively the Egyptian government is working in collaboration with the Israeli government. But Israel does not allow anyone to visit Gaza without going through Israeli checks. And in some cases...
When we're looking at these restrictions here, why does Egypt restrict access to the Gaza Strip if it's so horrible what Israel's doing? Why does Jordan restrict access to the West Bank if it's so horrible what Israel is doing?
Yeah, and in the case of the West Bank, it's an Israeli border control that you're going through, not a Jordanian one. So Israel is in control of the West Bank. In the case of Gaza and Egypt, the Egyptian government effectively is on the U.S.-Israeli team. That is really effectively all there is to say about that. So they work in collaboration to advance a shared interests of Egypt, of the United States, and of Israel.
That's the only reason why Egypt doesn't want Palestinians that come from the Gaza Strip into the Sinai Peninsula. There's no history of terrorist attacks or illegal shipment of weapons or anything like that.
Egypt does not like the Muslim Brotherhood, and Hamas is an outfit of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Okay. Why does the blockade exist?
And, well, let me ask you this question in relation to that. Cookies were not allowed in. Can you explain to me what threat cookies pose to Israel from your perspective?
Well, if they're the Keebler Elf ones, it's like 200 calories a cookie, so maybe they just didn't want people getting fat. Why does the blockade exist for the Gaza Strip? Why is there a blockade at all?
That dominates their lives.
Gotcha. Wait, so why does the blockade exist?
Because Hamas does not want to play ball with Israel. That's why. Israel
What does that mean? Hamas doesn't want to play ball with Israel. That's like the fourth time I've asked the question. I'm just curious. Why would Israel put up a blockade? Was it just to starve those poor people? Why don't they have a blockade in the West Bank?
Because Hamas does not have a peace agreement with Israel. Hamas
That's it? That's the only reason, just because they don't have a peace agreement?
Well, until the Israeli government agrees to A, B, and C. What would your reaction to that be?
Well, first, I would really want to know, why does Israel blockade the Gaza Strip? I think it's the fifth time I asked this question.
If you're restricting people from being able to eat cookies and chips and sodas in Gaza.
So one of the things that's frustrating about the Israel-Palestine debate is, like Ben Shapiro, on the other end, you just have people that are blindly partisan. We can't acknowledge at all why Israel would blockade the Gaza Strip. You're going to tell me it was to install these harsh humanitarian conditions that are somehow putting the whole population on a diet and starving them when their population is like tripled? Like, it doesn't even make sense. Why can't we at least acknowledge, like, okay, sure. Why can't we say, okay, sure, Israel put the blockade up because people like Iran and Turkey were shipping in weapons to the Gaza Strip in submersibles that were used throughout all of Israel during the Second Intifada of 2000-2004. And then once Hamas took over and then essentially ejected Fatah from the region, Israel felt like Hamas was going to continue to engage in attacks against Israel. So they wanted to blockade to prevent weapons from going in. Now, you can say that and still say you feel like Hamas can fight, but why not be honest about why the blockade exists? And even when you say things like they were blocking things like sugar, related items like cookies and everything, isn't that literally one of the big fields that they used for their early Qassam rockets? Was literally like fertilizer and sugar that they would mix to shoot rockets continuously over into Israel?
Again, do I call you Steven or Destiny? I'm not sure.
Steven is fine.
I feel like we're playing a game, and I really am doing my best to have this.
Hold on, I don't appreciate it playing a game because you're not aware of the underlying facts. If there's something that I said was incorrect or irrelevant, wait, can you point to me exactly what I said was incorrect or irrelevant to what my argument I just made? No, wait, don't. You just tell me what I just said. What part of that was either incorrect or irrelevant?
Here, let me point it out to you. Please listen very, very carefully. I'm going to be as clear as I can be.
I feel like you're just going to do another talking point. You're not actually going to address anything I just said, but okay.
When I tell you, I'm going to address it extremely directly.
I'm aware that there are quotes from Israeli leadership that are definitely unhinged when it comes to people in the Gaza Strip sometimes, or Palestinians in general. But when I try to look at like what is the ultimate outcome, what's actually happening, are the people in Gaza being starved? When that population has exploded, one of the highest birth rates in the past 2 decades, I don't understand how they could sustain it if they didn't have food.
If you want to judge it exclusively by that people are still able to have children when they're being treated like utter garbage, that means they're not being treated so bad.
We weren't talking about being treated like utter garbage. Your implication was that they're being starved.
Yeah, the Israeli officials said, by the way, and you know why that blockade ended up, why they started letting food into Gaza?
Those ships weren't trying to deliver food and aid. Those ships were just there as protest. No, they weren't. 3 of the 5 ships were empty.
This is not a good faith conversation. It really is not.
How is it not? Because you're not familiar with any of the details of what you're talking about? Because you only have talking points?
Who cares about an empty ship?
Because if your goal is to bring humanitarian supplies, why is over half your fleet empty? Because their goal wasn't to bring humanitarian supplies. It was to create propaganda talking points to people like you. They had no desire to actually bring humanitarian supplies there. The Coast Guard, Israel literally said, if you want to bring them in, park here, and we can wheel it in after we inspect the cargo.
Israel wants to control what's being let in and let out.
Of course, because these people have been sending rockets at them for the past 20 years. Yeah, they do. They literally are doing it. Yes.
No, you're putting your finger exactly on what the problem is. You're saying Israel gets to act as if it owns the Palestinians.
Because they do. They control all that space. Yes.
No, they don't get to control that space.
They literally do. They literally have been. Yes.
Yes. That's called an illegal occupation. That is what that is. They're controlling other people against their will in violation of international law.
If Palestinians don't want a 2-state solution, what is Israel supposed to do?
Yeah, Palestinians bent over backwards to try to allow for a Palestinian state to emerge and for a 2-state solution to exist. Again,
what happened in 2000 when Arafat literally walked away from Camp David?
And more settlements and entrenched their occupation of the West Bank.
No new settlements were created. They didn't claim they were going to fully withdraw because nothing was on the table. That's just not what the Oslo Accords were about. Arafat signed these and he was happy about them and he went to the negotiating table in 2000. I mean, like, so he didn't walk away. Why did he even start the negotiations in 2000 if he just didn't want to do them?
I'll tell you what the negotiations were about. He started the negotiations because he thought that Israel was going to allow for a Palestinian state to exist. But there was never, ever a serious commitment to end the land theft of Palestinians, to end the expansion of that land theft.
And I think the reason why is because there was never a serious commitment by Palestinians to a 2-state solution.
That's nonsense. The Palestinians made the offer quite open. When you look,
Palestinians and Arabs already said no to that when in 47 with the initial UN partition. So we already ignored that. So that's gone. That's off the table.
Yeah.
Now we're looking at
this is insufferable. No, it's not gone. I don't know what you're talking about.
You don't get to say you don't get to have an agreement on the table and then say no. Actually, we're going to try to kill all of you. And then when you fail, go okay. Well, let's go back to that agreement. 47 and 48 is off the table.
Palestinians in 1947 were being asked to give up more than half of their country to allow for the creation of a Jewish state. And they said no to that.
What country?
What do you mean, what country? It doesn't have to be a sovereign country.
There was no country there. There were a collection of tribes and people that lived there, subsistence farmers. There was no country of Palestine.
They lived there. That's all that matters. This is like saying that white settlers taking over the United States was fine.
You keep bringing up the United States. The United States is a sovereign state with recognized borders. You just said that there was no sovereign state of Palestine in 47.
When Israel was created, a series of massacres were committed against Palestinian towns and villages. 700,000 people were driven from their homes.
First of all, 700. So it was like 20,000 people. I think were 10 to 20,000 people were driven from their homes. The rest left because they were worried about violence. But not 700,000 people weren't driven from their homes.
Yeah, you can. If that's a distinction that is meaningful to you, you're free to feel that.
That distinction is absolutely. Oh, okay. Well, I'm sorry. Would you agree then? Would you agree that millions of Jews were driven from their homes across the entirety of all the Arab states after 48, after 67, after 73?
Hundreds of thousands. Yes, and I think that there is a plausible case to make for that being the correct language for it. And frankly, there is admissions of Zionists playing a part in that to try to make Jews feel less safe in other parts of the Middle East in order to drive them to Israel. Again, not history I'm expecting you to be familiar with, and that's okay.
I'm super familiar.
Gives Israel the right to say that these refugees don't get to come back home. They don't have that right. So the point is...
Why don't they get to return? It's because they left and then they waged war against Israel to try to destroy them. Why would you want them back after?
Who's the they? The civilian population?
The civilian population, the surrounding Arab states, yes. Because it was gone. But I'm just saying that, like, it's regardless, Britain had the territory. They were the ones with the mandate to administer to it. That was the agreement.
The point is importing a Jewish population from Europe and then trying to force the Palestinian population living on the land to leave parts of it in order to allow for a Jewish state to be created is morally wrong. That is...
I mean, like, it's complicated. I mean, they purchased the land. Yeah, it is. It is complicated. They did not purchase the land. They did. A lot of it was purchased. Yeah, the Surstock Park, they were huge.
50% of historic Palestine to a Jewish population that owned 7 to 9% of the land.
That's partially true, but they weren't giving it. That partition plan for the Jewish state wasn't initially given only to Jews. The division of population would have been 55% Jews, 45% Arabs that lived there, which kind of hurts the idea that Jews wanted to expel all the Arabs from the land. That expulsion didn't come until after the surrounding Arab states declared war on the newly emerging state of Israel in an attempt to expel them from the region. What part of what I just said was incorrect? You keep saying no and then not actually...
I'll tell you which part of what you said is incorrect.
Okay.
30% of the population of the 700,000 plus Palestinians who were driven out before 1948. Before the neighboring Arab armies got
Yes, because there was a civil war that started. Correct, because there was a civil war that started that went from 47 to 49 in that territory. That civil war started because Arabs rejected the partition plan, and then they started to go hard. They wanted to fight. Yes, they rejected the partition plan. They started to fight. Obviously, Israel, not Israel yet, but the Irgun, the Haganah, and the third one, the pre-IDF people started to defend themselves as the Arabs started to fight their villages. There was a civil war that started in 47, and then in 48, all after Israel declares independence, all of the surrounding Arab states decide that they're also going to join and go to war. And unfortunately for them, I guess Israel won that war. And then, a lot of Palestinians fled their villages afterwards because they were worried that their villages were going to get destroyed. And Israel started to grab land, and Jordan grabbed land. That's when they got the West Bank and then annexed it. That's when Egypt came in and they grabbed land. They got the Gaza Strip. That's what happened afterwards. But I mean...
No, this is honestly a remarkable attempt at having a conversation.
What did I just say that was incorrect?
The militias that you described pre-1948, before they became the IDF, were considered, many of them, terrorist groups.
Not really. The Irgun was, or Haganah, not as much. It really depends on who you're talking about.
And they've engaged in a campaign of ethnic cleansing. They've gone into Palestinian towns and villages, and they've executed people en masse to drive people out. Those are the actions that they engaged in that you just described as self-defense. It is honestly laughable.
Some of it was self-defense. Some of it was massacres. There are, absolutely. Of course, they were massacring people on both sides. I'm not saying that the pre-IDF force, and even afterwards, Israel's engaged in massacres in towns, horrible ones in Lebanon. Like, I'm not going to say they're totally innocent, of course. But it's not just one side is the aggressor and the other side is this innocent party that is doing nothing. There was Arab violence against Israelis pre-48,
And what Israel is currently engaging in Gaza. Can we do that for a little bit?
Sure.
All right. On October 6th, that is one day before the Hamas attack, the people of Gaza had been living under an Israeli blockade for nearly 17 years. That is greater than the number of all vetoes cast by all permanent members of the UN Security Council combined on all issues for that same period. So that's the level of U.S. diplomatic protection that they give to Israel.
It also shows the level of aggression the UN has towards Israel. The UN has done more resolutions condemning Israel than like every other country in the world combined.
I think there's
also something to be said that like when we talk about how, you know, like the deplorable food insecurity conditions in Palestine, isn't it something like 25 to 30% of that population is literally obese? Okay, I don't think that the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip are suffering from starvation. Okay, now there are issues relating to healthy food. There are issues related to cleanliness of water. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say the conditions in the Gaza Strip are great. They're obviously not. And in some cases, they're
that's really
deplorable.
disgusting, Stephen.
I understand. I know.
Really
I'm sorry. I just wanted to qualify because I know you're about to talk about how October 7th is just the natural outcome of oppressing a people like this, who've also, by the way, as they're starving to death, they're also launching rockets for the past 20 years, trying to kill civilians in Israel as well. But okay.
Concedes, and you're here making jokes about the population.
Maybe we should take, first of all, I don't care if you're not in the region. I don't even care what your opinion is. I don't care what South Africa's opinion is on Israel. Why don't we ask questions about the surrounding countries? Why is it the case that Egypt, for instance, also stopped supplying electricity to the Gaza Strip? Why is it that Egypt is equally motivated to maintain the blockade against the Gaza Strip? Why is it that Jordan doesn't seem to care about the border controls? Could it have to do with the fact that in 1970, the PLO and Arafat literally tried to kill the Jordanian king? Why is it that like the only allies that Palestinians have are people like Hezbollah and the Houthis? Like, you can paint these broad pictures of how evil BDS is and how evil Israel is, but there are reasons why these conditions exist, and you won't acknowledge any of them. You talk about for 15 years, all they did was suffer these horrible humanitarian conditions. Well, why are they still launching rockets? How can they still launch rockets, thousands of rockets every single year, if there are all these enduring horrible humanitarian conditions?
Yeah, this is hilarious. Yeah, so even in places
I know that you keep saying that. This is hilarious. They don't want to get lost in the weeds. They don't want to deal with the history. You just don't know the facts. And people like you, by the way, are contributing to the enduring bad situations on the ground. Because as long as you continue to think there's only one side here that's doing any wrong, there's never going to be any enduring resolution, any lasting peace.
With all due respect, and I'm not sure how much of it actually is due, you seem to have this bizarre addiction to the idea that both sides in this issue is the reasonable and sensible thing to do. Well,
to be clear, hold on. I'm sorry. I don't mean to both sides. If I gave you that impression, I mean to both sides. I hold the Palestinians more responsible. Sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you. So that's the fun part here, is that you have these people who think that you want to acknowledge this and you want to acknowledge that. They try to diffuse responsibility here and try to mix things up a little bit as a means of trying to seem more reasonable. And I'm sorry, this does not do you any favors in this case. Throughout history, there are oppressed people and there are oppressors. And even though the oppressed sometimes do things that are wrong and morally indefensible, that does not change the fundamental dynamic of an oppressor and an oppressed population. That is the fundamental reality. And you have a situation
to be clear, what you just said, that wasn't the fundamental reality. That was a very generic, vague, random call out that literally said nothing. There are oppressors and oppressees. Like, what a worthless statement. Like,
yes. Yeah, I know. Yeah, who cares? I tell you that every single major human rights organization in the world says that the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza is imposed by Israel.
Do you also acknowledge that they say that, for instance, like Hamas uses human shields? Yes. Amnesty International says that.
They do not. See, you don't know what you're talking about.
They don't? You don't think in 2014 in a published report, you don't think Amnesty International has acknowledged that?
You don't know what you're talking about. It's just incredible how little you know and
how well, I've actually read the reports. You should try it sometime. You should read the reports for the flotilla stuff, too, that you try to bring up when you're not aware of. I think it's actually really interesting when you read the actual stuff that happens and not just headlines from...
Let me attempt to educate you for the billionth time.
Please, yes, for the billionth, yes.
So what human rights organizations accuse Hamas of, including Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, is the fact that they operate in civilian areas and hide in civilian areas which endanger civilians. They acknowledge that much. That is not the legal definition of human shield.
That is the legal definition. I know what you're... Oh, tell me. Please give me the Finkelstein quote. Go ahead. Tell me what the legal definition is. Yeah.
Okay.
If you station yourself around civilians, you are engaged in using human shields. That's why specifically under international law, the ICC recognizes as well, if you have a civilian location like a hospital that's also housing military targets, that target becomes a military target. You have to do all the collateral assessment and everything, but that's literally how international law is written. Correct. That definition that you gave me for human shields, of you have to force civilians to go to areas, nobody in the international community uses that. Only some pop historians or pop scholars use it because they think it makes their argument sound stronger. Yeah.
Wonderful. The avalanche of nonsense, and see if I can
You keep saying avalanche of nonsense. I mean, I can cite you international law, I can cite you historical facts, I can cite you...
Go ahead, just give me some room to speak. That's wonderful. Be allowed to continue. They made it illegal.
Gotcha. So to be clear, you're saying before that, you're saying that the Israeli official policy was to use human shields. That was codified in the military doctrine.
That's official.
It's so
policy.
Crazy that they say that. Yet the only image I've ever seen of the human shield is that one boy on the Jeep that gets posted 50 billion times over and over again. But okay.
So in the case of of Gaza, it is almost entirely built from wall to wall.
That's not even close to true. Have you ever seen a map of Gaza before? That's not true. It's not wall-to-wall buildings. There are plenty of open spaces. They just don't operate out of those because they know they would get targeted.
Yeah, they're an extremely urban area, and so when they engage in guerrilla warfare, they do hide in civilian areas. The intention of that is not to hide specifically. By the way, all these Israeli claims about having a command center under a hospital, which turned out to be false, just the list of Israeli lies about the claims that they have made just in the past few weeks. It's absolutely remarkable. They have just repeatedly made claims that turned out to be false. They've directed people to go to so-called safe zones and then drop 2,000 pound bombs on those safe zones. This was documented even by the New York Times, the fact that they've bombed safe zones with indiscriminate weaponry.
Do you also recognize the documenting that Hamas is launching rockets from declared safe zones as well? Or do you think that that's fake news?
Israel declares those as safe zones, says this is where you have to go, and then drops indiscriminate bombs.
And then Hamas also launches, it's not, nothing is indiscriminate. Oh, you don't know anything about Hamas launching rockets from this area. You know every single Israel attack, but not the Hamas ones.
Yeah,
okay.
I know what human rights organizations document.
Well, you don't. You didn't know that in 2014, Amnesty International said that Hamas was using human shields. So
again, you don't know what you're talking about. And there's no denying that Hamas commits war crimes as well. You would have to be blind to miss that part. Nonetheless, Israel's war crimes are of far greater scale. It is not even close. 18,000 facts a second whenever you have something to say, in order for us to not be able to have a really productive conversation, I think gets in the way of us really getting anywhere.
Well, those pesky historical facts, they really mess with the narratives and the headline reading.
I can't spend 18 hours debunking every single random thing that you bring up.
When you don't know any of them, of course not, yeah.
Genuinely, even though I did not particularly enjoy this conversation and I did not think that you were engaging in it in good faith, I nonetheless do appreciate you making the time for me to come on. So at least to that much, I am grateful.
Yeah, thanks for chatting. Bye.
Take care.
I also don't like when people want to say that I'm uneducated or uninformed on a topic, and then they complain about getting into the weeds. Why would you not want to get into the weeds if your primary complaint is that I don't know what I'm talking about? That seems like the best way to prove that I'm a retard, is get into specifics then and show me where I'm wrong. I think that Israel would have been okay emerging as a country with like a 45% Arab population. I think Israel, because they agree to the 47 partition, I think so. It seems to be the case. But if everybody else wants to f around, then Israel will, not only will they say, oh, well, if you guys want to fight, then you're all getting kicked out. They also, in the 48 war, Israel didn't just take over their 47 partition plan territory. They expanded beyond those lines as well, which is what I think was one of the big calls internationally for other countries to be like, hey, you guys need to stop fighting and chill, because Israel continued to expand their borders past the 47 partition agreement. But it basically seems like that's like the history of like the Arab nations are like, okay, well, we're going to get you this time. And then Israel's like, well, if you're going to try to get us, we're going to get a little bit too. And then they keep expanding that way, basically. Now, Arabs keep saying, or the Arab states, and now broadly speaking, I guess progressives or lefties or whatever, keep saying that Israel was always an expansionist country and they were always going to expand or whatever. And that maybe that is true. I don't think any, from what the little I've read, no, I'm not even going to say that anymore. F you. Most of you people don't read anything. Okay. From what I've read, it doesn't seem like Israel was going to be a super expansionist nation. However, I can't say that in good faith that I know that. It could be the case that if all the surrounding Arab states were super peaceful, maybe Israel would have actually been on like an expansionist bend. Maybe they would have tried to take over other territory regardless, you know, at the very least, like maybe they would have fought over East Jerusalem because they felt like they were entitled to that entire city or something, you know? Yeah. So, you know, but I don't think anyone in good faith can say, absolutely not. Israel would have never taken any other land if the Arabs would have just chilled. I don't know if anybody can say that in good faith. But I also don't think you can say in good faith, the plan was expansionism the entire time. They were always going to do it and blah, blah, blah. I was like, oh, okay. I'm not saying that. I don't think they're like above it. I don't think that morally the IDF's like, we would never use human shields. It just doesn't serve their interests as much. But for Hamas, it does. The more dead Palestinians, the stronger their international cause, basically. Hamas doesn't care about civilian casualties on either side. That is not true. Hamas does care. They want more. It strengthens their cause. The more dead civilians, the stronger their cause. And you know that because think about it. What's the number? What is the only thing anybody knows about this conflict? What is the most quoted thing about this conflict? What's the only thing that anybody talks about? It's the death count. It's the body count. 20,000, 25,000, 50% dead children, 20,000, 10,000 dead civilians, 15,000, 20,000, 300 a day, 500 a day, 1,000 a day, 200 a day. Like that's the only thing that people talk about. Yeah.